Hello and welcome to a new episode of the B2B POD. I really have the pleasure today to host an amazing guest, Mustafa Ali. Our title for this episode is Leadership Biases and How to Be Inclusive and Inspiring Leader.
Welcome to the B2B Pod by the Pulse of Dubai with your host, Radwa Hassan, a podcast that touches upon everything that's going on in and around the B2B industry.
My guest is Mustafa Ali. Mustafa is a sales leader and a leadership coach based in the UAE. He has worked with aspiring leaders from Fortune 500 companies to accelerate their leadership journey. Mustafa, as an ICF credentialed ACC and a certified workplace Big Five practitioner coach, is known for working with established and aspiring leaders to help them overcome mental barriers and realize their full potential. His leadership skills and coaching is strengthened by master's degree in business psychology. Mustafa strongly believes in allyship and works closely with women leaders to strengthen their voice, which helps him keep his coaching action oriented. And I really like this part, which is about his executive coaching practice. Mustafa also leads the Mosaic chapter for the Middle East at his organization. Welcome, Mustafa. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here, Radha. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
Great. And can I ask you about the Mosaic chapter, just out of curiosity?
Sure. So within the organization that I work for, ERGs is a very strong pillar of what we do, the employee resource groups. And one such ERG is the Mosaic, wherein we try to bring in individuals from different backgrounds, different contexts into the organization and make sure that they are recognized and promoted, and equal opportunity is provided to every single person within the organization, and also address topics that organizations generally don't. So it's a safe space for employees to discuss a variety of topics that actually impact them, their well-being, and how the organization could actually help.
Wow, this is really impressive. I really like this initiative, and would definitely catch up more with you on that. So our topic is a very interesting one, and it is about the biases, and we see the impact of biases everywhere, but our angle for this episode is about the biases at the workplace mostly. So leaders get into the role mostly without paying keen attention to biases. And we all have biases depending on our upbringing and life experiences. And biases, conscious be it or subconscious, can play out in our behavior and can be a deterrent. So in the episode, we will be diving deeper into the steps of recognizing biases and how to overcome it at an individual level and then at an organizational level. Different sets of biases and types of challenges, and also types of biases that we come across. And we can't have a better person to speak about that than Mustafa. We spoke a lot about the different types. Challenges that females see in the workplace sometimes, some biases. And also for males, we're not talking only about females, we're talking about male, female. In general, the biases, conscious or subconscious, against any gender, race, and culture. So, Mustafa, would you be able to give me your angle and your definition about the biases? Conscious.
Sure, I think it's a great starting point. Let's define, let's call out the elephant in the room. So conscious biases, these are biased attitudes about a group that can be either visible or invisible that come into play. Unconscious, on the other hand, are biases that operate outside your awareness and your control, and they can be particularly difficult to be aware of because in many instances, these are the biases that you have been conditioned to as a little child in many instances. So those are, that's a simple definition, I guess, of unconscious and conscious bias.
I really would want to define both of them because there's systematic bias and there is the unconscious bias that we also want to pay the audience's attention to.
Sure. So the way I would define that is unconscious bias are the things that you have grown up with, right? You're not even aware these things exist. However, conscious biases are learned through experiences. Now, imagine a child, watching a cartoon as a kid. During watching those episodes, you see portrayal of characters. You see a portrayal that bad or an evil character generally has a darker skin tone. A superhero generally has got a lighter skin tone. And this is so unconscious that growing up as a child, it's ingrained. I remember this experiment that was done, I can't remember by who, but a 3-year-old girl was given a variety of dolls of different skin tones, and she was asked to pick the most beautiful doll, and she picked up a white doll. Because in her mind, subconsciously, she was somehow conditioned to think that white is beautiful, black is not.
Spot on. I was just in this very specific conversation with my 10-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And she was like, well, I'm not pretty. So I said, why? Why'd you say that? You're so pretty to me. You're smart, and it's not. And I started to go on lecturing about how smart, or that it's not about the outside beauty and all these things. And then she was like, no, pretty girls are the blonde girls.
See?
And
there you go.
Yeah, and it got me to a point where I told her, okay, let's dig up on Google Miss Universe for the last 5 years. And then I started to get out the pictures. And I said, none of them is blonde. So it's not about being blonde. It's not the colors. And this is, as you said, spot on, that kids and many generations are led to believe that these are the standards. And it's even now more, maybe growing up, it was not less pressure, but we were under some assumptions, and they were not deep rooted because there was not social media. Now, with all that social media pressure, peer pressure, perfection that people try to bring to their looks and everything, that kids are becoming
absolutely
so overwhelmed with that. And it's a 24/7 stimulation.
I couldn't agree more. It's nonstop. It's in our face at all times. We have reached a point, as I think it was Simon Sinek who said, where normal has become unacceptable. The standards are skewed to a level because of all the filters that you have on your Instagrams and TikTok, that normal is no longer beautiful.
Awesome. And if we look at the different types that you had mentioned in our
Sure,
discussion,
yeah. No, thank you for bringing that up.
5 types.
I mean, since we are speaking about leaders and organizations, usually in psychology, we have identified 5 biases that really come into play at a workplace, right? I'll quickly list that for our listeners, starting with the affinity bias, which is very simply defined as we prefer what is like us over what is different. Then we have got the experience bias, which simply means that we prefer to act quickly rather than take time, like rushing into things. And then comes in the safety bias, although it might sound good, but again, it's still a bias, which essentially is how we protect against loss more than we seek out to gain. Then you have got a distance bias, meaning we prefer to what is closer to what is further away. Imagine, a colleague sitting closer to your office, perhaps could be, dearer to you or important for you compared to someone who is in a different city, perhaps. And finally, we have got an experience bias where we take our perception to be absolute truth and objective truth. So there you go. Those are your 5 biases that impact us in our workplace.
Great, thank you. And if we dig deeper and talk about eliminating biases in the workplace, what is your view and a best practice, or rather a good example of how you see eliminating biases
Sure.
in the workplace?
Great question, but I have to say this. If you're a human, you are biased. So there is no silver bullet. There is no way you can eliminate bias completely. That's just not going to happen. Because if you're an individual who thinks, then you are biased. That's as simple as that. What can be done, though, is to manage these biases. You can become self-aware. You can learn about these biases and understand how they manifest, and then every single decision you take could be an informed decision rather than jumping on to, one of the biases that we spoke about. And there's many steps that we could look at in terms of how we start and how we go about it.
Yeah. Can we go into maybe a few of the steps that you believe are really good to keep an eye on to make sure we're following that path?
Absolutely. I think, in my opinion, the first step towards, solving any problem in life is firstly to recognize, one exists. And same thing with biases. I think as leaders, even so important for leaders and every single person, I would even say, is to understand where those biases are coming from and what is it that you are more drawn towards. Only then you could perhaps figure out how you could actually, manage it. One simple way is, firstly, the step one, in my opinion, is to firstly accept that you are biased. There's no two ways about it, right? So we all are biased. The second thing would be to identify those and recognize those biases. And a simple way of doing that is looking at something your listeners may want to simply Google, is the Project Implicit. Now, this was a program that was developed by a couple of professors, wherein they have got about 40 odd tests for different biases that exist in workplace and otherwise. You could actually go on and take that survey, take that test. It is absolutely confidential. You don't have to share the results with anyone. And take that survey and you will discover a lot about yourself. So that is the starting point, really, to recognize where your biases are. Once you have done that, that gives you the information and the insight you need to handle it. Now, if you are among the brave, and so I call you upon to survey yourself. It cannot, it doesn't have to be a named survey. It could very well be anonymous. Just ask your teams. And like I said, it's for the brave, and be ready to be surprised and get your team, your peers, your colleagues, your different lines of businesses to fill that survey out for you. And there you have it. You have an exact data to reflect on.
This show is brought to you by Logicron, a leading demand generation company, providing solutions and synchronizing all your B2B needs logically.
That brings me to a question about the tests and the surveys that the organizations do. How far do you see they take the results very seriously? And specifically because the space that you're talking about with the business psychology and the coaching and all the different assessments, the psychometrics, the 360s that some organizations would use. But I see that in most cases when they use them, it's either to decide on a promotion or just it's a tick in a box to make sure that they have done it. How far do you see them take this seriously to really take the right action and measures?
Sure. So I'm yet to come across an organization that actually does some testing on biases. I don't think one exists because it's very personal and people protect what they say, how they react to their best ability and try to demonstrate that they are unbiased. The surveys and tests you spoke about, rightly so, are used for succession planning, promotions, so on and so forth. And perhaps the closest you could get is the values assessment to understand what your values are. But that's as far as it gets. But for biases, the reason why I say you should look at something similar to Project Implicit, because it's personal, because you know what your biases are. And if you know, only then you can address them. If the organization has to address the biases that a leader is displaying, then it's a different conversation. That is simply discrimination, racism, or whatever term that is applicable. Then it's a different matter. But I guess our conversation is around what I could do as a leader today that will help me become a better leader, A, and empower my team and support my team and help them thrive.
Yeah, certainly. I fully agree with you. That's a great tip. But before we leave that, I want to ask you about the tool, about the biases that you've mentioned. This is a free tool, right?
It is an absolutely free tool. Hundreds and thousands of people have taken surveys, so there is lots of data point, and it's absolutely confidential. You don't have to share it with anyone, not with your employer, not with your family. Just it's for your eyes only.
Perfect. Then I believe we would need your help to add the link there. So if you can provide me with the link so that we can add it to the episode for our listeners to make benefit of this tool. So that
Sure.
would be great. So we also touch in our discussions on the biases against certain gender, which is in some cases the females with the different challenges that they face in accelerating their career and growing in business. So, can we mention a few of the different biases that you see some females go through from your point of view?
Absolutely, and I think it's alarming, to be honest. And if you look at the latest data that is coming out, and especially in the tech industry, women hold only 26.7% of the jobs, right? And it has actually gone down from 2020 to 21. So we are down 2% year over year. So that gives you an indication of the female talent that we have as not fully being recognized, perhaps not being empowered systematically or otherwise, but there is evidence to suggest that a lot can be done to improve the diversity, inclusion, and promotion of female leaders. Now, what can be done? That is what your question was, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think organizations need to start looking at where they are, looking at the data, and that's the best place to start, right? Look at your attrition rates, right? What have your attrition rates been, in your organization if you were to split it by gender? That is a great indication of how your organization is being perceived by the different demographics within your workforce. That is a great place to start. And the second thing is to foster those conversations, to have those conversations openly in the organization, where you are supporting, you are creating allies, you are demonstrating that your organization stands for the inclusion in a real sense. One simple example of how to do that could be the language. In my career, I have come across a lot of sales leaders who would refer to a salesperson as a he at all times. I have met
Yeah.
doctors, and the moment they say a doctor, you say he. So the first response is it's a male. A leader is a male,
Yeah.
right? A salesperson is a male. A doctor
Yeah.
is a male. That needs to change, and that can only happen if your language includes and reflects what you stand for.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the reference to the industry, the tech industry, because in one of the articles that I came across is talking about how in most cultures, masculinity and leadership are closely linked. But now it's not about the culture thing, it's about an industry, it's about the common practice, as you have referred, even job roles like sales. That's mostly you're thinking of a salesperson. And if we think of, and I'm sorry to say that, sometimes when we think of a female salesperson, we say, well, we need to make this balance in the team, not because we're looking at the skills or the value that she's going to bring. So it's really alarming, and the decline is more alarming. That is continuing to go down. The other point that I also see is that there is more tolerance when a male leader goes wrong and company performs really bad when there is a male leader, and there are certain justifications that, oh, why did he go wrong? But when there is a female leader and she goes wrong about strategy, she also gets all the blame. She always gets all the blame. It's because she's a female. It's because we have brought a female to lead the company. So she cannot do a good job. And we talked about logic not being so logical anymore. But the fact that I'm seeing that lots of male executive CEOs and very senior people like really go wrong about the strategies that they're running. And just like people say, oh, yeah, well, just an example.
No, there's no denial that there is an added scrutiny on female leaders in any space, not just at an organizational, even at government levels, right? Female prime ministers are subject to different norms, as we have seen recently, with the prime minister of a European country. So there's no denial in that. Right. And again, going back to the point I was making earlier, these are the biases that exist. And this is how people have operated for many, many years. So it becomes even so important that people recognize that what they are, saying, how they are behaving in reality versus what they think, there is a gap. And that can only happen with self-awareness. I usually say self-awareness is a superpower. And I guess all of us, leaders within organizations, they need to be aware of where their biases are and try and make sure that the metrics of what good looks like are the same for a male leader or a female leader.
Yeah, most certainly. And it's like even sometimes if a female leader works in a traditionally male dominated space, she's viewed as maybe competent, but less likable than the other male counterparts because it's seen that she is trying to imitate men. So she's not a female. But if she acts as a female in some situations, she's soft and she's weak. So you really do feel sometimes that's like what you guys really want the females to act, to be assertive, but you take assertiveness as she's trying to copy men. And it's not a genuine trait, or if she's soft, it's because she's a female. So it's somehow confusing. And my other question would be for the younger generations, if you have younger females in the team, how would you guide them about handling the biases or talking to their male bosses if they witness any biases?
Sure. There's no silver bullet to this, right? Regardless of male or female, I think all of us, when we are starting off in our careers or even as established leaders, one should always strive to seek out different perspectives from our own. Right. And find people with common background, people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different interests, and get to learn. Just be curious about it. Right. Of course, if you are facing discrimination because you are a male or a female, definitely talk about it, right? In the first instance, I would suggest to anyone, take it up with the person whom you felt, was being biased towards you. Have that conversation and let them know how you felt. Perhaps they will be able to explain that their behavior was not right and they would do something to change it, or maybe clear up any misunderstanding. So that usually is the first step. If that works, brilliant. If it doesn't, I'm sure organizations, at least a vast majority of organizations, do have systems in place where this could be safely brought to the attention of senior leaders or your HR department if it goes in that direction. But organizations should also have created safe spaces for their employees to come forward and share how they are feeling, if they are being treated equally or being discriminated against, creating that psychological safety, if you like.
I really like that feedback, and I think it's a great tip for every gender and age group, of course, in the workspace. I wanted to ask you about the access to the informal networks in organizations, especially for females. And we're all aware that in most of the organizations, there is an informal network of either leaders or managers, and getting the females to have access to this network and to sponsors is not the easiest. This is one of the most tough things because it's dominated by males. And when she tries to penetrate it, especially in our region, as you have also rightly mentioned, is not easy. How can we handle that?
Organizations and senior leaders, I guess, they play a major role when it comes to breaking, if I can use the word, the traditional way of running organizations, if you like. What I mean by that is we spoke about Mosaic at the beginning of our conversation. So Mosaic is one of the ERGs. So organizations could look at as one of the steps is to create employee resource group within their teams and organizations, wherein people from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences can actually work on something that benefits the employees. They don't have to be from the same department or same group. You're mixing up a lot of different teams based on their interest and their, the group that they would like to be a part of. That could be one thing, that creation of those employee resource group. Second thing is also mixing up the teams, wherein traditionally you would have team design in a certain way. Perhaps given your business needs, of course, you look at how is it that you could have a good blend of team that includes people from diverse backgrounds. And you spoke about challenges for females to enter into these inner circles of where men usually are not open to having any new members even. So that could be one of the ideas to consider.
Awesome. And I think this is a great steps to follow, because it is very critical. And I've seen it that with some networks in some organizations, the female is not part of it. Some decisions are made or discussions that she's not part of it, and she feels like left out. How can you ensure that you have enough diversity and inclusion in your organization and within your team?
It all begins with hiring. Hiring is the first step, right? Now, the steps that you generally would want to take is to look at where your teams are and look at what could contribute to the mission and the vision of the organization. So it starts with recruitment as an organization. I would even take it a step further. I would also say that it in fact starts at a college level. You are essentially preparing individuals to be ready for the roles that you want to be filled. So step one, it starts at college, university, government level, wherein the resources are provided and everything that an individual need is given to them. But coming back to the original question, which is about how could this be done within organizations. Now, one thing is you got to look at is how have you been doing in the past years? Like just look at your data and just get a sense of where you are today, and based on that make those hiring decisions, which are yes, you're bringing a right fit, but can you do a little more on hiring practices? Can your recruiter reach out to 10 more candidates and find a wider pool of candidates to bring in from? Second thing is building allyship. Now, we spoke about systematic, suppression. We spoke about how organizations don't necessarily go about promoting. So creating that culture of allyship within organizations where no one feels that they are left out. I mean, last time we spoke about the language of inclusion, right? The leaders usually, and I've seen this quite a lot of times when you're referring to a salesperson, you always say he. Right. And when you're referring to a leader, you always say he. Even for a doctor, you always say he. So that is a challenge. The language needs to be inclusive. It needs to be a part of your operating model. And finally, create an environment of psychological safety. If at all, at any point, any member of your team, male or female, feels they have an opinion, give them the space to speak up. Give them the space to express how they are feeling about it.
So if we are talking now about ensuring that we have enough diversity and inclusion in an organization, what would be your recommendation to other leaders? What would you do within your team?
One of the things that we got to start at, and even before I answer, what is it that we could do as leaders to have better inclusion, I actually want to take a step back and talk about what women can do for themselves, and what others, such as people in power, organizations, colleges, schools, can do to foster that growth. What is really important that we recognize that there is a problem where we do not have enough female leaders, systematically or unsystematically. Either the women are not applying for the roles that they should be applying for, or there is a certain way wherein female applicants are turned down. So it starts with that, right? First, we got to make sure that female leaders or aspiring leaders, should I say, have got access to good mentors. They have got access to content that will make them feel more confident. I remember attending one of the workshops. It was run by Google. It was called I Am Remarkable. And it was a brilliant workshop. So that just boosts confidence of people who are participating in those sessions and give them the sense that, you know what, I'm ready for this role. A lot of issues I have, or challenges rather, that I see with working with my clients is the imposter syndrome. They don't think they are ready for it. And I tell them, no, you are absolutely ready for it. Just go and apply, right? So self-rejection is a huge issue that needs to be tackled, ensuring that as an organization, you do everything you possibly can to have that environment of encouragement. That's number one. Number two is the systematic operation, wherein you say, oh, you know what, this role requires a male candidate. Right now, I fully recognize that there might be a certain client who does not want to work in a certain way. So you have outliers like that, not going to deny that. However, for the vast majority, that is absolutely rubbish. And it's just our own biases preventing us from bringing talented female individuals onto the team. I remember I used to run a business development team in Saudi Arabia at one point. And 65% of my team was females. And it was by design because the caliber and the work ethic that they demonstrated was unparalleled.
Wow.
I was new to the country. I was learning the country myself, but it was an eye opener for me. And till this date, and I fully recognize that perhaps it was the most amazing time to be a part of the journey that Saudi Arabia is on at the moment, right? So those are the two things that we have to take into consideration before we actually get on to encouraging or looking at the steps that females should be doing.
Perfect. Let me ask you women's access to networks and sponsors. Sometimes there are gatekeepers. So what are the different ways that you would suggest to not necessarily get across the gatekeepers, but to be part of the networks within an organization for a female, if this is the way to be connected more on par?
Yep, no, that's a great question. It's a practical example, or rather a challenge that we see, especially in our part of the world, in the Gulf, wherein it's hard to penetrate into groups that are predominantly male. I've seen at events wherein, individuals at a round table are, all males are. It's a tight circle. It's not easy to get in. Now, how could an organization look at it? So 2 steps, in my opinion. Number one, have some sort of ERGs within organizations, employee resource groups, where you are doing work that is, yes, for the organization, but not necessarily just the daily job you do. So other stuff that you could look at, create ERGs that would benefit the employees. And the second and an important thing is to mix up the teams. And finally, it's training, right? Calling out the elephant in the room. If a behavior like that is observed, and then it's worth bringing it to the table.
Yeah, definitely. For those who are going to cooperate to do that.
Sure.
All right. Perfect. It's really spot on and very practical examples. I believe that would be very helpful for so many to follow. Let me ask you now my favorite question, I would say, for every guest. What are your very golden tips and tricks that you would give to other leaders to work on their subconscious biases and to be open to that? Because I personally see that some people don't believe even that they have biases. They keep pushing back and say that, no, we don't have that. No, it's imagination, it's delusion, it's whatever. So what would be your key key tips to that?
Sure. So I'll speak in a general sense. So you rightly said, I mean, we think we are perfect. We think our thinking is absolutely objective. I'm not biased. I'm absolutely neutral. We all think that way, but it couldn't be further from the truth. Now, one simple example of that, and again, no one has to share with others. Just reflect. Now, go back in your own workplace life or outside work. Have you? And it's a question that people should be asking themselves. Have you ever assigned a task of organizing a party or a get-together to a female colleague of yours without even thinking? Have you assigned maybe a task that is at accounting or math to an Asian colleague of yours? Right? Mm-hmm. If you have done that, you are biased because your biases are telling you that, females are better at organizing birthday parties or get-togethers or conferences even, maybe, I don't know. Or you think that Asians are good at math, so let's give them a math problem. If you have done that, you are biased. And I mean, these are just two examples, but reflection is really, really important, that we as leaders or even aspiring leaders reflect and identify, where our biases may be. A job of a leader is to have that inclusive environment in the team, inclusive environment within the organization. And we spoke about one of the things, which is the language. Focus on the language, focus on what you say, how you say, and how it impacts your teams. And just be aware of that. And it will go a long way in creating that environment of inclusion. Thirdly, I would advise them to get a mentor or a coach. Could be within organization, could be outside their organization, mm-hmm. but you need someone who could show you the mirror, who could have those objective conversations wherein it provides you the space to grow and recognize your own full potential, not only to eliminate biases and whatnot, but also to become a leader that is inspiring. Right. And here's my advice for aspiring leaders. Right. So you are an aspiring leader today, and tomorrow you will be a leader. And being in a leadership position, it's a privilege, it's a responsibility, it's an honor. So my advice is always be aware that you are biased, you can be biased, and learn how to manage them on a regular basis. And finally, once you have got to a position where you want to be, give it back to the people. Give it back to the people who have supported you. Give it back to the community. Become a mentor to someone who could emulate you and go on to the journey that they aspire to be in. So those would be my takeaways for leaders as well as aspiring leaders.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Very, very useful, helpful tips and guidelines, I think, to raise that level of awareness that we all need, whether it's conscious or subconscious bias, for all leaders and for everyone. I think this is part of we could include it as the climate change. It's part of a climate change that we need to raise awareness around in the organizations.
Indeed. It's going to take time, but it will happen.
It will happen. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Really a pleasure to host you, and look forward to maybe more episodes with you. So
hopefully, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So thanks to our listeners. Please make sure to check the link to the free tool and check your biases. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the B2B Pod by the Pulse of Dubai with your host, Radwa Hassan. This show was brought to you by Logicron. If you aren't already, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can visit us on thepodcast.ae and follow us on social media at the B2B Pod. See you next time.